Dick Whittington's success story has got everything. The poor orphan boy who goes to the city.
Elizabeth Taylor's children. Dick Whittington's rise from rags to riches might be the stuff of folklore, but Elizabeth Taylor's legacy writes its own myth. Not of streets paved with gold, but of silver screens, violet eyes, and a heart that beat with fierce love and loyalty. She was a queen of Hollywood, a woman whose presence could silence a room, whose beauty became iconography, and whose marriages were chronicled like chapters of an epic. Yet behind the veils, jewels, and paparazzi flashbulbs, Elizabeth played a more private and profound role, that of a mother. What does it mean to grow up in the orbit of someone who isn't just famous, but iconic? To be held in the arms of a woman adored by millions, yet long for a quiet moment away from the spotlight's burn? For Elizabeth Taylor's 4 children, life wasn't just about inheritance of wealth or celebrity. It was about surviving the weight of legacy. This is their story of love, pain, art, and the silent strength it takes to walk your own path when the world never stops whispering your name. To Michael Wilding Jr. Michael Wilding Jr., Elizabeth's firstborn, came into the world in 1953, greeted not only by family but by a media obsessed with his famous mother's every move. He was the product of her marriage to British actor Michael Wilding Sr., a union Elizabeth once described as calm compared to the passion storms that would follow. That calm may have provided young Michael with the grounding he needed, though the noise of celebrity was never far behind. From a young age, Michael was the mirror of his mother, not just in his features, but in a quiet sensitivity that seemed almost foreign to Hollywood. He tried acting in the 70s and 80s, appearing in shows like Dallas, Guiding Light, and a few film roles, including Deadly Illusion. But it was clear the calling wasn't there. Michael wasn't chasing applause. He was searching for something real. In Santa Fe, New Mexico, he found it. He turned to stone, literally becoming a sculptor, quietly chipping away at blocks of marble, limestone, and bronze. He often described his process as revealing the form already hiding in the stone, a metaphor that could just as easily describe his journey toward selfhood. In a life where identity could be so easily eclipsed, Michael carved out a reality of intention and calm. Through this, he also nurtured a new generation of artists. His daughter Naomi Wilding co-founded the Wilding Cran Gallery in Los Angeles, a haven for contemporary art and a subtle nod to the legacy she carries. Naomi and her brother Tarquin are now fierce advocates for the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation. In them, the torch burns, not with spotlight, but with substance. Michael remained loyal to his mother, giving her away at her final wedding and offering some of the most heartfelt words after her passing. She lived life to the fullest, he said, and perhaps in his quiet way, so did he. Not by chasing cameras, but by crafting meaning from silence. Christopher Wilding. Born in 1955, Christopher Wilding was just 2 years old when Elizabeth and Michael Wilding Sr. divorced. His childhood was scattered across continents and sets, a puzzle of school, travel, and the ever-present swirl of tabloid fascination. From the outside, it was glamorous. From the inside, it was often lonely. As a child, he remembered reading magazines just to keep up with his mother's whirlwind life, a surreal act of distance for someone so close to her heart. At school, classmates mocked and mythologized Elizabeth Taylor, turning her into a legend even in her own son's daily life. And for Christopher, this wasn't fantasy. It was his family. Yet he never rejected Hollywood outright. He just refused to let it define him. Christopher's contributions to the industry are tucked quietly in the credits. Assistant director, sound editor. He worked on cult and box office favorites like Tombstone, Overboard, The Shadow, and Judgment Night. His name was there, never in lights, but always behind the curtain. He preferred it that way. Photography was another passion, although he never sought exhibitions or acclaim. Like his brother, Christopher found beauty in details, not in declarations. His marriages, too, reflected his nature. He first wed Aileen Getty, heiress to one of America's wealthiest families, and together they adopted a son, Caleb, and had another, Andrew. Later, with his second wife, sound editor Margaret Carlton, he welcomed another child, Lee Lawson. Family for Christopher became a safe harbor in a stormy world. He rarely spoke publicly about his mother, but when he did, his words were quietly revelatory. In a BBC documentary, he shared a moment when Elizabeth admitted she hadn't been a great mom. His reply, "I felt like she was a good mother." Simple, tender, a sentence that holds a lifetime of forgiveness and understanding. Today, Christopher is one of the trustees of the Elizabeth Taylor Trust. He manages her legacy not just with legal precision, but emotional reverence. The glitz never appealed to him. But protecting what his mother built, that became his purpose. Liza Todd. If Michael was the quiet craftsman and Christopher the vigilant steward, Liza Todd became the emotional soul of the Taylor children. Born in 1957 to Elizabeth Taylor and producer Mike Todd, Liza entered a world awash with adoration and tragedy. Mike Todd was the love of Elizabeth's life, bold, brilliant, and all-consuming. Their marriage was passionate, and when Liza was born, the joy seemed complete. But fate intervened cruelly. Mike Todd died in a plane crash just 7 months after her birth, a wound that Elizabeth never fully healed, and a loss that became the defining shadow of Liza's childhood. Raised by Elizabeth and later adopted by Richard Burton, the man Liza would come to call Dad, her life was constantly surrounded by figures of mythic stature. Yet Liza never seemed to seek the glow of fame. Instead, she turned toward the earth, the body, the beast, studying art in Europe and Los Angeles, with a fascination for animals that bordered on spiritual. Her sculptures, lifelike bronzes of horses, calves, dogs, are revered for their anatomical precision and emotional intelligence. They feel alive because Liza sees what most overlook. She signs her pieces Liza Todd Tivey, a name that distances her from the Taylor brand and connects her to her own. She married artist Hap Tivey in 1984, had 2 sons, Quinn and Reese, and built a quiet life in upstate New York. When they divorced in 2003, Liza didn't return to Hollywood. She stayed where the birds sang, the wind was clean, and the only spotlight was the sun. Her son Quinn now helps lead the House of Taylor and is an ambassador for the AIDS Foundation, continuing Elizabeth's legacy of activism with quiet pride. Liza rarely gives interviews. She doesn't seek recognition. But in her art, there is the unspoken voice of a girl who lost her father, watched her mother marry 7 men, and chose to make something lasting from the chaos. Maria Burton Carson. Maria's story begins not with headlines, but with hope. She wasn't born into celebrity. She was lifted into it. Adopted by Elizabeth Taylor in the early 1960s from a German orphanage, Maria was just 3 when she joined the Taylor family. She suffered from a congenital hip defect and had already undergone a dozen surgeries by the time Elizabeth laid eyes on her. And yet, Elizabeth didn't hesitate. "I want her all the more because she's ill," Taylor once said. "Maybe I can do something to help." This wasn't PR. It wasn't a charitable performance. It was love, pure and protective. Maria was legally adopted by Richard Burton, too, and raised in a household of stars and scandals. Yet she was always the daughter chosen, not born. And that distinction, painful for some, became a source of strength for Maria. As an adult, she turned toward fashion, creativity, and entrepreneurship. She co-founded a boutique talent agency and married television producer Steve Carson, with whom she had a daughter, Elizabeth Eliza Carson. Later, Maria had another child, Richard, with second husband Tom McKeown, though both marriages ended in divorce. Through it all, Maria remained fiercely devoted to her children and to living a life out of the public's prying eye. She has attended a few key public events, like her mother's 75th birthday and Richard Burton's Walk of Fame ceremony, but mostly she lives quietly, grounding her children in a world far removed from the chaos she once knew. Her daughter Eliza now serves as an ambassador for the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation, just like her cousins, continuing the circle of compassion that began with one woman's radical act of love. If Elizabeth Taylor's life was a dazzling script written in fame, fire, and vulnerability, then the lives of her children were the unwritten chapters, quieter, deeper, and etched in the margins. But the story didn't stop there. It continued through her grandchildren, Through philanthropic passion and through the long shadows her children spent their lives learning to navigate or outrun. The Taylor bloodline, by birth or bond, has never truly vanished from the cultural tapestry. While the world often remembers Elizabeth Taylor through her jewels, her films, and her marriages, her truest treasure may have been her family. And through them, her legacy lives on, not in gossip magazines or Oscar reels, but in acts of service, moments of reflection, and deeply personal triumphs. Naomi and Tarquin Wilding. Michael Wilding Jr.'s children, Naomi and Tarquin, grew up with the gentlest echo of fame in their ears. Their father may have walked away from the spotlight, but their grandmother's global presence never faded. Still, their lives were shaped not by red carpets, but by a sense of integrity passed down from a man who carved beauty from stone and a woman who carved courage from adversity. Naomi Wilding is perhaps the most public-facing of Elizabeth's grandchildren. A British-American art curator and gallerist, she co-founded the Wilding Cran Gallery in Los Angeles alongside her husband, Anthony Cran. The gallery, known for its edgy, socially conscious programming, has become a safe space for both emerging and established artists. But Naomi is more than a curator of canvases. She's a curator of legacy. As one of the official ambassadors for the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation, Naomi often speaks publicly about her grandmother's bravery. Not just as an actress, but as one of the earliest and most committed public figures to tackle HIV/AIDS stigma. At a time when many celebrities stayed silent, Elizabeth Taylor was loud. And Naomi ensures that boldness continues, using art and advocacy to amplify causes her grandmother would have fought for herself. Tarquin Wilding, meanwhile, is quieter but no less dedicated. A filmmaker and storyteller, he has produced several video segments and short-form documentaries for the foundation, bringing Elizabeth's legacy into the digital age. He once said, "People think of my grandmother as a movie star, but she was a warrior." Through his lens, we see the private warrior, the mother who stayed beside her dying friends, the activist who confronted politicians, the woman who never stopped loving even when the world stopped believing in love. Quinn Tivey. Perhaps no one today carries the public weight of Elizabeth Taylor's legacy more than Liza Todd's son, Quinn Tivey. Born in the 1980s, Quinn could have easily faded into the background of a famously private branch of the Taylor clan. His mother, Liza, kept him far from the spotlight, choosing fields, stables, and quiet studios over premieres and press. But something shifted after Elizabeth Taylor's death in 2011. Quinn didn't just inherit a name, he inherited a mission. Armed with a degree from NYU's Tisch School of the Arts and an MFA from USC's School of Cinematic Arts, Quinn entered the public eye with a thoughtful seriousness that stunned even the most hardened Hollywood insiders. In his role as a trustee of the Elizabeth Taylor Trust and the foundation's official ambassador, Quinn Tivey represents a new generation of mindful celebrity, one that uses legacy as a platform, not a pedestal. He often speaks at global health conferences, fundraisers, and museum events. And when he does, he's not quoting movie lines. He's talking about policy, stigma, treatment access, and the very real lives his grandmother's advocacy continues to save. Quinn has said that growing up with Gran was less about glamour and more about watching someone fiercely love her friends and fight for justice, even when it wasn't trendy. And perhaps that's the legacy Elizabeth Taylor always wanted. Not a museum of fame, but a living movement of compassion. Through Quinn, it thrives. Eliza Carson. Maria Burton Carson's daughter, Eliza, may have inherited the quietest origin story among the Taylor grandchildren, but her role is no less profound. Born in 1982, Eliza grew up with a different kind of pressure, not the flashing bulbs of Hollywood premieres, but the whispered reminders of her mother's complicated journey into the Taylor family. And yet, like her cousins, Eliza Carson has grown into her legacy with grace. A proud ambassador for the Elizabeth Taylor AIDS Foundation, Eliza has often been described as the soft-spoken engine behind many of its youth outreach efforts. She understands firsthand what it means to live in the shadow of a global icon, while carving out an identity that is uniquely her own. Though she largely avoids traditional celebrity media, Eliza has stepped into public advocacy with a clear voice. She represents not just the next generation of Taylors, but also the diverse, inclusive future her grandmother would have championed. Elizabeth Taylor may have adopted Maria out of a desire to give love, but in Eliza, we see the generational impact of that choice. Love, it turns out, can build legacies even stronger than fame. The most surprising thing about Elizabeth Taylor's family isn't that it exists in the long shadow of Hollywood royalty. It's how human, fragile, and grounded it is beneath all the sparkle. For all the attention Elizabeth drew in her life, her children and grandchildren have collectively built something quiet, steady, and immensely respectable. They didn't inherit stardom, they inherited pressure, and they turned it into purpose. Michael carved peace out of marble. Christopher found strength behind the lens. Liza shaped animals that breathe through bronze. Maria chose to live quietly and love fiercely. Their children became the heirs not of diamonds, but of dignity. Elizabeth Taylor once said, "I am a very committed mother. I give my children love. I give them my time. I give them attention. I give them everything." And perhaps that's the real headline. Not the number of husbands, not the record-breaking jewelry auctions, not even the Oscars. The real legacy is the people she left behind. Not followers in fame, but leaders in empathy. The enduring legacy. In 2021, on the 10th anniversary of Elizabeth Taylor's death, her family gathered not for spectacle, but remembrance. In virtual events, social media campaigns, and private moments, they honored the woman who gave them everything. Sometimes imperfectly, but always fiercely. Elizabeth Taylor's fight against HIV/AIDS continues through the foundation that bears her name. Her fight for love, no matter the cost, continues through the way her family loves each other, quietly without need for headlines. If you think of Elizabeth Taylor only as Cleopatra, as Maggie and Kat on a hot tin roof, or as the woman who wore the Krupp diamond, look again. She was also the woman who carried a broken child into her arms and said, "You're mine now." The woman who told her children she wasn't perfect and meant it. The woman who, despite a life that glittered, always came back to the things that mattered: love, healing, and home. If this story moved you, leave a comment. Share this with someone who remembers Elizabeth Taylor not just as a Hollywood icon, but as a human being who loved deeply and gave everything she could. And don't forget to subscribe, because there are still more hidden stories waiting to be heard.